So we now added our stateful widget, and with that we can click this button to change this dice here, the dice image. But of course, at the moment, we can only click it once. I mean, we can click it more often, but we always set it to this image that shows us a dice roll of 4, and that's ultimately not the goal here. Instead, we want to generate a random value between 1 and 6 and update the image appropriately. Now, to get there, we'll have to do a couple of things, and most importantly, we have to generate that random number. Now, that can be achieved with help of a feature provided by Dart, which we have to import though. We have to add an import where we import something directly from Dart, and there from the math sub package. So this is now not a third-party package that would have to be registered in the pubspec.yaml file. Instead, this is really from Dart itself, but a Dart feature that is not available in all Dart files automatically out of the box, but which instead has to be unlocked in a file by adding this import. Here we want to use a math feature provided by Dart. To be precise, here in roll dice, I now want to use the random constructor function, which is provided by Dart's math package, to create an object that has various methods that help us with the generation of random values, random numbers. Here, for example, the nextInt method. NextInt can be called to generate a random integer, and for that, nextInt actually wants an input, an argument, which is the maximum, the highest possible integer that should be generated, though that value, as we can read here, will actually be excluded. So if we pass in a value of 10, for example, we would generate a random number which is greater or equal to 0 and smaller than 10. So here, if I want to generate a number between 1 and 6, I can pass in 6, and that would give me a value between 0 and 5. So to make sure that it's between 1 and 6 instead, I simply have to add 1 here. And that would then give me a number between 1 and 6. So that generates such a random value. And we could now use that random value and store it in a variable called dice roll, for example, to then dynamically set this string here, this path to an image. So in the end, what I want to do here is I want to replace this number, because my images are all named dice1, dice2, and so on, so I just need to replace this number here with my number, which is between 1 and 6. And it must be between 1 and 6, because I only have images for 1 to 6. Now, getting such a number here into a string is pretty easy with Dart, because it gives us a nice syntax, a nice feature that allows us to kind of inject values into strings. We can add a $sign here, followed by the variable name that holds the value that we want to inject into the string. So now this will dynamically construct a path, which is assets images dice dash, and then whichever number is stored inside of dice roll. That's what this special syntax does. It injects the dice roll value into this string. So when we set active dice image to an image path, this path will include the actual number that was generated here. That's one way of doing this. However, we don't actually even have to store the entire path as state here. Instead, we could get rid of that active dice image variable here, and instead just add a new variable that could be named current dice roll, which initially maybe is 2. And then that's the variable I want to set here in set state. And I want to set current dice roll here equal to my dice roll variable here, or actually make this a bit shorter, get rid of that extra variable, and just generate my random number here and use it here to then update current dice roll inside of set state. So now I just managed the dice roll number as state, and that allows me to then grab this path which sets the dice roll dynamically, or which injects that dice roll, and use that down here. And instead of using dice roll here, I now want to use this current dice roll variable, which we do update inside of set state. It's up to you which approach you prefer, but this keeps our state a bit leaner, a bit easier to understand, since we're just managing a number here, and then we dynamically derive the actual path based on that state value, so based on that number, whenever build is executed, and as you learned, build will execute when we call setState here. With that, if we save everything and force a reload, we should be able to click this and generate different dice rolls. Now, of course, you might sometimes roll the same number twice, so simply click this a couple of times to see some differences on the screen. So that's our different dice rolls showing up on the screen here as we click this button. But the current approach still isn't optimal, because at the moment I'm always creating a new random object here whenever roll dice is executed. And whilst this works, it's a bit redundant, because technically this means that every time roll dice is executed, so every time we click the button here, a new random object is created and stored in memory, so in the memory of the device that is running our app, and the old random object that was created there before will be thrown away. Now, thankfully, it will be thrown away, so therefore at least we don't occupy the entire memory at some point, but still that is some redundant object creation and deletion in memory, which is not a problem for this basic app, but something you might want to avoid. And of course, my goal with this course is not to teach you any way, but if possible, the best possible way of solving a certain problem. And therefore here it would be better to cut this random object and instead create a new final value here, randomizer could be the name, which stores this random object, which we then use here. And actually this doesn't even have to be inside of our state class here. This could even be defined outside of it, maybe here, right below the imports, because it's totally fine if this is only created once when this code file executes for the first time, and it doesn't have to be re-executed every time the state object is created. Technically here, the state object shouldn't be recreated, but still there's no need to keep the randomizer inside of this class here in this application. We can instead set it up as a globally available final data container here in this code file by adding it right below the imports and then still referencing it by name down there. And with that, we should have the same result as before, that we can click this button and change the image, but now it's a bit more efficient.